I could think of no better event than an event about protest to do a little democracy in the room tonight. Which at an event like this at the library, I think, is to not only hear from our incredibly brilliant speakers, but also to hear a bit from the people around us. We are all New Yorkers, and I don't know, maybe if you've been to these events before, you not necessarily talk to the people next to you, you hear more from the speakers than them. So we're gonna do that for a few minutes. Okay. We're gonna wrap up now. Very last thing you need to say, finish your sentence. Thank you very much. All right, and Lauren, so as I said, we don't have unlimited time because we want to get to the conversation. So Lauren is gonna just pick a couple of questions, and if it was your question and you would like to share, just give us a little preview of what you talked about. I'll come to you with a mic.
Okay, can you hear me? All right. Let's do what unique capabilities do artists bring to protests? Who had that?
Some questions are also in the back. So if you're in the back, but this group up here had this question. Anybody wanna? There we go, in the back.
Oh, hello. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about how artists bring theater, like a theatrical element to it, and we were discussing how that can sort of also create like a visual and emotional connection, but also like we were talking a little bit about what's the revival chorus? The resistance revival chorus, and like they're like a group that walks around like wearing all white, and it's all a group of women that all sing different sort of like resistance songs, and that brought us to like talking about choruses in general, and like how there's choruses that like create like a community, and yeah, so like beyond just the actual protests, like sometimes the artists also bring a sense of community and social connection to the people involved, as well as a visual and emotional and theatrical element that makes it more interesting and a spectacle. Dyke, you want to add anything?
Great. I think we're going to respond to that in a little bit. But thank you, Lee. Thank you for talking. Are there differences between political art and activist art? What do you think they might be?
So we talked about a lot of, I don't know, it sort of went in a lot of different directions here. Right at the end, we were talking about something interesting, which is because it's art, you know, what you put into it might not be what other people take out of it. So there's the question of intention, and that might make up some of that dividing line between political art and activist art. There's room for misinterpretation when you're making art. There's room for, you know, things going in a totally different direction than what you thought you were making. We also talked about activist art having sort of a call to action in a way that political art might not always. But then we also talked about like a Venn diagram and how it would be fun to sort of like really draw it out and plot it out and see what falls into each category and what falls in the middle. And maybe there would be a lot in the middle, and maybe it would sort of move between the different circles, depending on context. What else? We didn't hear from you. So. No.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Should we do another one? I think this one, what other protests do these images remind you of, is maybe worth asking.
That's more about in the back.
Do these images remind you of other protests?
Or it's a little different. Okay. But about other protests this made you think of. I think, was it you guys? No, I think that was you guys.
What was your question?
Thank you. Yes, you did.
Okay, well, what's your question?
If it's close, then that's what it is. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I can talk, but she was talking about her living in France. She was talking about living in France when the Yellow Jacket protests were going on. And my sister was visiting there and came back and shared with me. So we were talking about the protests like in DC. There's been recent protests about the No Kings and then the French. You gotta love the French. Get the streets.
Yes.
Sure. One thing we also talked about a bit is props and the necessity of props in all of these images and all of the protests we sort of talked about, and obviously a very deep connection to artists in that sense.
We have time for one more. Okay.
What did we not do? What makes a protest effective? Are there ineffective tactics?
See you guys. Yeah. Who did I miss? Oh, okay. Yeah.
We talked about the importance of clarity in deciding the objectives of the protest. If the goal is to motivate other actions, to make noise, to shock people. And we felt that if there was too much ambiguity or there were too many goals that were kind of competing at the same time, that there's a possibility of losing support for your protest or not getting the same kind of numbers and momentum. We also talked about how there's a risk of having another issue kind of hijack the protest. So you might go in with a particular motivation or intention to raise awareness about a cause, and then some other issue hijacks the conversation. So, for example, thinking about the climate activists who were throwing different things at paintings and museums, and how there was a whole public debate about whether it was ethical or not, rather than about the core issue that they were trying to bring attention to. So people were more shocked at the activists themselves than the perpetrators of the climate injustice. So those were some of the things that we talked about.
That's great. Okay, I think we're going to take over.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I'm going to start. Hi, I'm Ellen. Thank you for coming out. This is really amazing. All of the responses that we just got about props, this amazing thought about props, the conjuring of those images that we've all seen in newspapers of, I think, what was the climate group that threw the paint? There were like multiple, was it BP?
Stop BP.
Stop BP, yeah. So like all of those images that we've seen all conjure a kind of protest, which is about a kind of immediate intervention. It's about spectacle. The word spectacle was used. It's about controlling a certain media narrative. It's about, at one point in the book, you talk about how ACT UP spoke through the media rather than to the media with their actions, so controlling the narrative around a certain issue. But there's also all of these instances in this book where, like with the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, which really, whose history has really not been told in art history, which is, I guess, like my home discipline, but also in general, it's not a group that people know, which was a group that built its own institution called the Prison Arts Exchange. So, and also like something like Project Row Houses. So there's another form of activism in this book, which is also about institution building and also sometimes working within large governmental organizations like Benny Andrews of the BECC did after he stopped working with this activist group. He worked for the NEA for many years. So there's a question about institution building, working within large bureaucratic organizations and less visible forms of activist practice versus the kinds of activism that we're talking about now. So I was wondering if you could reflect on that, because I have never seen a book which kind of like draws all of these different tactics together and also doesn't kind of decide on one, doesn't kind of pick a side or doesn't see them as opposed. I don't think they're opposed, yeah.
Yeah, and thank you. First of all, that was amazing. And thank you all for coming tonight on this very hot day. And thank you, Jackie. Thank you, the New York Public Library.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the book, there are collectives, there are duos. I see you here tonight, duos. And there are individual artists. And I wanted to show a broad range of different kinds of approaches. And the book, like Ellen says, doesn't land on one being better than the other. It just moves historically from about 1969, 1968 until the present day. It begins with a collective called Women Artists in Revolution and the ad hoc Women Artists Committee, which was a a group that came very shortly after that, and those were both groups that came out of a bigger group called the Art Workers Coalition. So it begins with that history, and then it moves all the way forward to Nan Goldin and her group, Prescription Addiction Intervention Now, or PAIN. So again, I wanted to show each group as a case study. So each group has their own, or each person or duo has their own chapter, to allow the space and time for the particularities of what they did to come through. The book is like deeply granular. It's a lot of detail. It's hard for me sometimes even reread it again. It's just so much detail. It gives me a headache to think about how much work that was. And it was all based on oral history interviews. So every single chapter, I spoke to who I could, whoever was still living. So that in the beginning, I encountered this like urgency to start interviewing people, because the earliest group is one of the older groups, and a lot of people were passing away by the time I realized that this was a book and that I wanted to get those oral histories done. I started roughly in like around 2017, but really in earnest in 2020 when I began teaching a class about some of this at Hunter College, and I noticed that people were passing away. So the oral histories became really important to it. And, you know, and so anyway, like, in terms of the structure and like allowing collectives or duos or individuals to be having their own, you know, space, and to not give privilege to one or the other. But, you know, everyone does something different in the book. There's not any one way of doing something. They all sit on the shoulders of earlier activists too. So that was like, I tried in each chapter to say, like, these people learn tactics, for example, like we talked about the BECC learned tactics from civil rights movement stuff, and you know, other groups like PAIN that I end with learned tactics from ACT UP that Ellen mentioned, which is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, what else?
It's a discussion. Yeah, it's totally a discussion. I think going back to the first comment, where we're thinking about art as having this particular ability to conjure emotion or conjure a certain image or like drive something home. I think something I was really struck by with the tactics, which are like the BECC's institutional building or Project Row Houses, there's all of this activism in which there is no visible component to it. It is what we would consider to be reformist work.
Right, I forgot about the institution
and
building.
So I guess, you don't have to answer it. Maybe Karen, you could ask your question, but I guess there's a kind of tension in the book that's very interesting between a kind of a visible praxis and a less visible bureaucratic machination.
Yeah, let me just say one thing about that, which is, so like the first chapter, Women, Artists, and Revolution, you know, begins with demands being put on museums and regular forms of protest that we've seen, like people picketing outside of a museum, but it ends with building a feminist organization called the Women's Inner Arts Center, which was in Hell's Kitchen for a long time, and artists here know that space pretty well. So, so there were these some institutions building a room of one's own kind of feminist institution building at that time, especially in the 70s, was quite the moment for that. I was just in the archives of the Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale or New Paltz area of New York, and going through their archives and thinking about how feminists were building these rooms of their own. But then there were people like Benny Andrews who, after the BECC lost its funding in 1982, because of Reagan did not want to fund prison arts programs, and that was a huge loss for that group, it demised, but he became the visual arts director of the NEA. So just interesting that artists moved into institutions in some ways, and you know, maybe even thinking about artists moving into teaching as an institution too. I don't know. There's a lot of different kinds of institutions. So there was institution building. There were people who, you know, never did that and have kind of strayed that path. But I don't know if that answers. But yeah, we can move to you, Kieran.
Great. Thank you so much. There's a great moment in the book, on the chapter on the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, where Benny Andrews has been running the Prison Arts Initiative for several years, and then it's 1982. Reagan's come into power, and there's changes to the National Endowment for the Arts. There's a 14% cut to their budget, and the rules are changed that the federal government can no longer fund prison arts programs. And so A.B. Spellman, who is an administrator at the NEA, but who was also a militant in the Black Arts movement, In the 1960s, he was working with Amiri Baraka, Larry Neal. He was someone who kind of really positioned himself even like to the left of the Black Panther Party, but he's working as an administrator under Reagan, and he has to write the letter to Benny Andrews and say, like, I'm sorry, but we have to cut your funding. And that's when the BECC stops its formal operations. And obviously today we've just seen with the One Big Beautiful Bill, PBS and just lost its funding. I was wondering, what did you learn in your research about how artists have come up with alternative funding models that they're not entirely dependent on the president?
Yeah, and as we've learned, it's maybe not a good idea ever to be totally dependent on the government for that. Again, when I was at the Women's Studio Workshop, it was just harrowing to hear about how they've lost so much of their funding. And luckily, that group always had these like workshops that they do, like a summer workshop where they have students coming in. And so they have a different funding stream, which is helpful. In my book, I don't talk about them in the book, but in my book, in the introduction, I began talking about a group that I was a part of in 2020, which was called Do You Know Where the Children Are? And it was two artists, Mary Ellen Carroll and Lucas Michael, who were working with lawyers. They had received these accounts from children who were seeking asylum in the U.S. and being held in detention centers. It was called the Flores Agreement. They received these transcriptions of the children who were interviewed. I mean, this is all very timely of what's going on right now. Mary Ellen and Lucas reached out to artists and asked them to make artworks, including these statements of the children. And then that was turned into a fundraiser for many different immigrants' rights organizations like Innovation Law Lab, Team Brownsville, Terra Firma, and the Safe Passage Project. So I worked with them on, copy editing things and helping them talk to the press. And they raised a lot of money. So that's one answer, that artists come together and they do these kinds of fundraising things. You can think about Project Row Houses just from the very beginning. Project Row Houses is based in Houston. It's now a major nonprofit. They have about 54 low-income apartments that they offer to the public. They have, this is a big chapter, you can read it, but they do a lot of great stuff. They've been around for 30 years. They started off small with some NEA seed funding, but they've gone on to get tons of money from the private sector, from people in Houston. So they've reached out to some of the more wealthy people, I think, in Texas are helping them, but they still get donations from the community. They always receive donations from local churches, which I think they have such a strong, this, I don't have to tell you because you're from Houston, but they have such a strong connection to the community. Like they'll never go under because the churches there are helping them. It's fascinating. And then another example I can cite from the book is Top Value Television, or TVTV, which was this collective of video guerrillas who, in my chapter, I look at in 1972, they got access to the floor of the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in Miami with this very lightweight equipment that was novel at the time called the Sony Portapack. And they interviewed everybody from the delegates, politicians, the other news anchors. I mean, they created what I think is a really exciting form of activism, also going out into the streets and interviewing Vietnam War veterans who were protesting the convention. Anyway, they made these two tapes that got broadcast on cable TV, made a huge splash, written about in most major publications. To create their work, they put everything on credit cards, which isn't a terrible idea for someone. I don't think they ever paid it off, but credit cards work, so you can think about that as well. If you're not getting your funding, you can put stuff on credit cards. This is like 1970. You just do it, right? You do whatever you can do. So those are some examples from the book I could think about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Do we want to ask? Let's see. What questions do you? Let's see. Let me think. I guess a big question that we could think about that we've a little bit touched on is okay. So I am trained as an art historian. One of the complaints that I get about my own work is that I don't foreground the art object enough. I don't describe it enough. I go into the political history too much. And this book is describing art objects alongside political practice and bureaucratic intervention and institutional work and media intervention, et cetera. And it's describing those two practices in a way that's aligned. So I guess this question is about why do you think that, like, where does the art object, I don't want to make it an overly conservative question, but I guess, like, do you think the art object is important? Do you think about formal questions? The Black Emergency Culture Coalition chapter, the chapter that we've been probably sort of talking about the most, Benny Andrews was a painter, Vivian Brown was a painter. Many of the people in that group were making paintings which didn't correlate directly to the kinds of activism they were doing. So I guess what I'm asking is, like, what do you think art does? Like, where does the art object fall in relationship to these practices? Do you think that's, like, maybe you can just reject the question?
No, I think it's interesting coming from a little bit of art history. I don't have as much training that you have, Ellen, but there is in the academy this kind of pushback to this kind of work. Like, this isn't an art history book. The publisher has put on the back that it's art history / politics. Sure, it's not really an art history book. It's a politics book, and it's about artists who did some politics. It's not. I don't go deep into the formal analysis of each of these incredible, examples. I mean, it would be kind of hard to in many ways. I don't think that's what the artists necessarily had in mind, though. I'm thinking now there are artists in the room who worked very hard on what they did, and like it is incredible. So maybe it could use a little formal analysis in some ways.
That's not what I'm saying. I guess what I'm saying is, do you think there was something about art that enabled, or also I guess the question is, where does the art object fall for you? Maybe just as a writer of history, do you think that there is something that the making of art objects alongside or as part of does to political expression? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I think art is always transformative. I think it has to be transformative. It's like this is one of the only transformative things in the world that I know of that changes people's minds and transforms itself. And it's people want art sometimes to be this discrete object that is timeless and has nothing to do with politics. And some people know this as like arts for art's sake, that kind of phrase. And there's kind of a revival of that right now, a kind of icky revival of that going on in particular art criticism circles. There's a big pushback to the rise of speaking about more people of color, artists of color, talking about Indigenous artists, that there are more museum exhibitions, not necessarily in New York City, but in the rest of the country we're seeing it happen, of Indigenous artists. There's some pushback to this, like, why is there so much social and political stuff in this art? It shouldn't be, it's just arts for art's sake. And I've always disagreed with that. And I think that's also why I couldn't stick it in art history long enough. I got tired of these criticisms. Like, I went back to philosophy. It felt better over there, where people didn't argue with me about this stuff. But yeah, it's interesting that there's some conservative, neoconservative aspects of the art world that linger, that don't want to think about this as...
Well, art as an institution is inherently really conservative.
Really conservative,
so like,
yeah.
But there is this like promise of freedom that it offers that was like, came up in one of the responses. Like, does art offer a space of political freedom or like kind of like being able to set your own terms, to start the question in your own terms, does offer something which is maybe like an illusion. But as an institution, it is inherently, based in a kind of...
And there's a lot of gatekeeping that keeps it that way within the academy. So yeah, as a student, you get kind of tired of those questions, like, why are you telling me this isn't art? Like, it is. Artists did it. Yeah. They did it in their studios. Like, what are you talking about? Like, of course it's art. So that was always very strange. And then, I always sort of push back on the arts for art's sake thing, because I think even if people are talking about, like, let's say abstract expressionists, painters in their studios in the 1950s doing action art, even the artists of that era were still responding to social and political things. Some of them were deeply political, like Ad Reinhardt. Like, we can talk about all kinds of examples of very political artists who went to protests, and maybe it wasn't necessarily in their work, but sometimes it was. So they've never been divorced. I don't really believe in the arts for art's sake. I don't really think it's even a thing. I think it makes me nervous when I hear it. When I hear particularly faculty, even 20 years ago when I was at Hunter College, there was a lot of that going on in that school, and it was strange. But things have changed, but it's still there. And it's sort of there's a retrograde thing where it comes back every once in a while. It's coming back big right now. People feel like they can say, again, like there should not be politics in art. Yeah.
But I guess to me, I'll just say briefly, like the thing that's distinct about this book is that each of the chapters describes a historical scene to clarify the possibilities that political practice offered, rather than what a kind of social art history does, which is plotting the grounds for how a certain object was invented, which is also, fine to do that. It's like has its place, but I think that's what's unique about the kind of historical writing that this book offers. Did you want to add something? Or no? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm like pulling you in. Yeah, so I mean, I guess the other historical question we could ask is about your interview practice, and we could think about the production of oral history as, I mean, I guess you touched on that a little bit already, but.
Yeah, but I could say more. I mean, my first book is a collection of interviews. It's something like 90 or something, just women, but that comes from a much bigger reserve of hundreds of interviews that I've done for the past, 15 years or something. And yeah, it felt right that my first book was this interviews book. I wanted to decenter myself. I wanted to put other people forward, put the voices of the artists forward. I just didn't want the art history book to come first. And then it kind of didn't surprise me that my first art history book would be about radical politics. There are people in the room that I went to college with who know like how deep that is in my blood. So, it's like, like very old friends would know that I've come from a punk rock kind of subculture in the 90s of a lot of this stuff. That's my bread and butter. So it wasn't that surprising that was the first art history book, even though I said it's not really an art history book. But yeah, interviewing has always been super important to me. And then particularly when I started to teach this material and realizing that Cliff Joseph had just passed away. Cliff Joseph from the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, like in the week that I started teaching the class for the first time, had just passed away. Faith Ringgold was, not doing well. I was able to interview Faith. Like, it was just, I was seeing a generation, like, passing, and it felt very important to start speaking with people quickly. And then there were people, like we've talked about Benny Andrews a couple times. He had passed away way before I was able to speak with his widow a lot, and the Betty Andrews Family Foundation in Gowanus has been a wonderful support system for this book, and many other archives and estates as well have been so helpful. It's a little bit of like a game of telephone. Like you call someone and they're like, oh yeah, you should go talk to so-and-so, and then they send you to so-and-so, and then you go to somebody else, and it's like you just end up interviewing like everybody, and they're all telling you different things, and you have to put it together. And that's the work, and I love that kind of work.
Yeah. Totally. Do you want to ask the success question, maybe?
Yeah, so I guess 2020, kind of you, in the introduction, you mark that as kind of a watershed moment for a certain type of renaissance of arts activism. The market was stalled. Lots of things were happening. I was in 2020, I was working I was working with you. I was at Art Forum, but I was also getting involved in organizing for really the first time. I always thought of myself as being sort of political, but I organized. I joined an organization. I worked on campaigns. The street protests were happening, and one of the campaigns was the Zoran Mamdani campaign for state assembly. And we were running 5 candidates. We won all of them, and that was my first taste of, oh, this is like what a political victory is like. This is like what it's like to win. It makes you think totally differently about what politics is, what strategy is. And a lot of the people who I think were the best organizers on the campaigns were artists, writers, poets, people who were getting really involved, but they weren't foregrounding their identity as creatives in that way. But so I was wondering, there's so much happening right now, but for me, one of the horizons is, the Zoran Mamdani mayoralty. I was wondering if you could share what maybe some of the successes or some of the most interesting wins you discovered in your research.
Yeah, and especially when times are really, really rough, when these things happen, it's like such a breath of fresh air, and you really feel like you can continue. And so there are a lot of different successes in the book. Trying to counterbalance stories that felt like not that they weren't a success or whatever, but that like the activism expired, which it should do. I mean, activisms are meant to expire. So many different groups, expired or people stepped away from them, and that's all good. But in terms of like big successes, one of the people I think about is Edgar Heap of Birds, who's a Cheyenne Arapaho artist who lives outside of Oklahoma City on his ancestral homelands. And I spent time with Edgar. I first interviewed Edgar must have been around 2017 or something, and we stayed in touch and had just a lovely connection. I've always loved his work. I was always kind of curious what activism was to him, and I wanted to talk with him more about it. And he, because he would say things like, we're always activists, we're always doing activists. He would talk in the we, and I realized it wasn't the royal we, he was talking about community, he was talking about ancestral elders that he had learned from, and so those were long conversations. Around the time I started to write the book, he wrote to me and he said, oh, I have some news. I've just endowed a gallery at the University of Kansas, where he went to school as an undergrad. And it's a gallery just for Indigenous artists to show in, and there's a residency program as well. And that seemed pretty massive, that he was able, through like philanthropy, like taking the money that he's earned as an artist to make the Edgar Heap of Birds Family Gallery. And then he did it again at Tyler, where he got his master's degree. So to me, these are massive successes. Like, it's hard to quantify that, but he's now created a legacy for artists that he knows of who live on the reservation where he is, or the reservation where his wife is from, and that people can go and like be artists and feel like they're taken seriously and learn something, and then have a show if they want to have a show. So that to me that's a success. I talked about Project Row Houses, eventually being able to create like 50-something affordable housing units. That's massive. The housing affordability crisis continues to be, as we all know, like the elephant in the room that the government wants to keep avoiding, but it affects every single person. And, a group of artists in Houston created a solution to it. I don't think that artists are the ones who are the people who have to create these solutions. Like, I'm not saying artists should have to do this. I don't think it's part of their work, but I think they have stepped up historically and done things, and it's important to keep track of it, especially when the government can't or won't. So they've created a whole bevy of different things in the Third Ward in Houston that have transformed, I think, that community. And then we can talk about how there's been other aspects as well. But they've also rehabilitated older housing stock. So they have a current program called PRH Preservation. This is where they're getting the private money from to do this. They buy up shotgun houses in the Third Ward as much as they can. It's not easy to do. It's so hard to do this, but they do it, and then they preserve the house, and then they offer it as affordable housing to artists and residents of Houston. So yeah, those are a couple successes that I can think of. Like, these aren't like, it's not like Zoran, but it's like, they're not like massive, like, but they're successes in their own right. Like, they create incremental change, and they are making people aware. And artists, certainly they didn't think they could do it, but they did. And to me, it's like just remarkable. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should we continue to ask questions, or should we open it?
You have a few more.
Okay.
Maybe a couple more.
Okay.
Something that comes to mind is also like the difference between perhaps what is happening in the Mamdani campaign, which is like artists organizing on behalf of on behalf of the DSA or on behalf of an alternative, right, Democratic Party, but not foregrounding their identity as artists, which is actually more related to what was happening in the 1930s during the New Deal, when an artist like Norman Lewis, who was in the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, he very much was like, I am a painter and I am an artist, and my activism is not in my painting. My activism is being on the picket line and fighting with police on the picket line and putting my body in a vulnerable place, and my art is this other thing which is pure and autonomous. And I'm not saying that the Mamdani artists feel that way, but just in terms of thinking about like an old left versus the historical trajectory of what your book covers, which is, the new left. but also truly like it's not the New Left, because it's a New Left that we don't know yet. There's so many instances in this book that are not included in standard histories of the New Left. So I guess I'm wondering, in your work on this book, like what you think about that distinction: artists who understand the creation of their work, the creation of their political practice as their work, or artists who keep those things separate. What you think about that, or what you learned about that in writing this book?
It's always a good question.
Yeah,
I feel like every single one, they all, every single instance in this book, they have studio practices. They show their work in galleries or whatever, and then there was the activism too. And whether that meant collective activism with a group or the duo or by themselves. So there are a few chapters in the book. I've talked about Edgar Heap of Birds. There's one chapter just about him where I am doing the formal analysis. I was a good art historian in that chapter, and I tried to really unpack the whole arc of his career. And Agnes Denes is another artist who I do that with as well. But yeah, for the most part, so much of my learning is based on what the artists tell me. So I interview them, they tell me the deal, and I would hear over and again, I have a studio, I make my work. It is not necessarily what I bring to the protest, but I do have meetings with my group or with my duo in my studio, and there's a lot of bleed and there's a lot of crossover. But I also, making an abstract painting in your studio, it can be a form of, I think, protest and resistance for yourself. It can be, it's a transformative thing. Mm-hmm. The artist can be in their studio making an abstract painting, which is about beauty and about bringing beauty into the world. And then they're also the same person who is creating a campaign that goes out onto the street. Mm-hmm. And that's the same person, and it's cool. And that to me is very exciting. But then there were artists who are very much political, and everything they do is political art or activism. Or in the case of Agnes Denes, she's known as a political artist, just like Edgar Heap of Birds, but I'm trying to create a distinction of saying, well, I think it's actually activism too. I think it does something. There's an action. There's more of a focus on the doing of something. It's not just creating something that can be seen and consumed and we can think about it. I'm talking about something that actually goes out and is based in action and is trying to actively, whether through protest, wheat pasting, a field of wheat being planted, there's an action that happened. It's not passive, in other words.
So it's not about consciousness or what we think of an art object, a political art object, having a certain conscious effect on the viewer. You're distinguishing activist art as something which is leveraging its autonomy in a different way, where Denis's work is very much about preservation and about using the autonomy of art to do something else with the land. Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah.
I also think I got tired of all of these distinctions and definitions. Yeah. And it turned out the worst thing you can do for this is to try to define it. Yeah. And people have come down on me in reviews she doesn't want to define what activism is, and she doesn't want to do this, and she doesn't want to do statistics, and there's a reason. It's not quantifiable. You cannot quantify these things. And some people have. There is a book. Someone has tried, and it's I don't think you can make a formula and be and check, now we've done the activism. It doesn't, you can maybe think about successes and failures. You can try to have conversations about that, but I don't think there's not one way of doing it. There's not just a formal definition to give. So what I've tried to do is do it through the case studies, illustrations of facts, history, knowledge, people did this. This is what happened when they did it. I'm not really making a lot of value judgments in this book. It's not a form of criticism. I am an art critic. I'm not really doing that in this book. I'm not writing reviews. I'm it is, I said, a social, I think it is more social history. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you have,
open it up?
Yeah, we can open it.
We'll open up for a few. We're aware that it's kind of warm in here, so we'll try to just do a few questions. If you have a question, raise your hand, please.
Right in the back over here.
Hi. Sorry, my English is not very good, but I'm going to attempt this. So many a times we are also premising these talks whether art should be political or artists should be political or not. as if we assume that everyone has the luxury, like, do all people can all people be either political or apolitical? I'm using in the broadest possible sense, and in that sense I'm trying to also question the unique position that one attributes to the artist. Like, like artists are also, I think, are also part of anybody, like somebody who's a teacher, somebody who's a worker, somebody who is a chef. So why can't we like think about artists as just one of the things, and like then have the conversation from there? So yeah.
Oh God, artists do so many things. Art is often, it's their unpaid job. I mean, if they can even afford a studio now, like, good luck. But yeah, I mean, artists often, they wear so many hats. They're, I can't even get into it, how many things. It is very hard to be an artist. And so even more difficult, I think, to spend your time volunteering to do activism on top of it that's not easy. I mean, it was the choices that people made because they felt the urgency, like it just had to be done. There was necessity on top of all of their other social roles. It's remarkable to me that they could get anything done. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think my approach is similar to yours. Like, I don't put them on, a pedestal necessarily. I don't know.
Oh, we have another question. I guess I could say one important, like maybe historical detail about your book is that there is a big book about the Artist Workers Coalition, it was not all white men, but the most famous members were, and I think your book really deviates from that. So in terms of like who has to be political, there is a way in which many of the artists in this book who occupied subject positions which were not those of white men, they didn't have a choice. They had to engage in politics based on where they were coming from. So I think that's also like another way to think about it. And they leveraged the category of art or not. We could think about whether art is an alienating category. Does art alienate you from waged individuals, right? Art is not it has a weird relationship to the wage, has a weird relationship to the economy. So do you get alienated as an artist from, in this question, the question was everyday people, right? Whatever that is. But we had another question, I think.
No, I don't think many people have probably not read the book, so.
Wait, we'll bring you a microphone.
But I was thinking as you were talking about the long arc of this in people's lives. Like, I'm thinking about the Calamu House, where I grew up in Cleveland, and the Children's Art Carnival up in Harlem, where I have a piece up. We're going to have a show on Hiroshima soon this August. Or where Watts Towers, where I worked, and the Compton Art Center, which actually merged with the real estate, because Compton was the first suburban community to allow African Americans. They fought for the ability to buy houses. And they elected a mayor, and she supported it. And John Otterbridge, who was one of my mentors, did this incredible thing with the Compton Art Academy. And then when the Watts riots happened, 4 or 5 artists really pulled out of that. It created the Watts Towers Art Center. So I'm just thinking about politics is your life. I mean, it's kind of like it's your community. It's where you are. It's not like a subject matter. You don't become a political scientist. It's how you live your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, for sharing that. And those are excellent examples of things I don't talk about in the book, but again, like, I hope people, there's so much more. These histories need to be really.
I'm just thinking that the stream of your thought is really important now.
Yeah.
Because as we engage today.
It's a way of life, right? I think many artists, not every artist, like I've said many times, I'm not prescribing artists should do this, or artists are the problem, or they're the solution, or, no, but like they are politicized. They become politicized. It's historical. Like, why do we pretend it's not true? Why do we think that their art is this whole art for art's sake thing, to get into it again? Like, artists weren't interested in the purity ever, as far as I mean, probably at some point they were, but in the 20th century, in the mid 20th century, they always mixed with politics, I think. Yeah, certainly surrealism. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes quietly because they didn't want to lose their life over it. But in the States, they've been, I don't want to say, I'm not going to make an American exceptionalism thing here, but they have been vocal in the States. And they have the privilege to be vocal in the States. But in other countries, in certain countries, it's harder, for sure. I've had brilliant students write papers about, you know, who have educated me on the countries where they're from or other countries where it's much harder to be an activist, but they're doing it, and it has to be anonymous, and it's silent. You cannot put your name on things, and, you know.
Hi, yeah, just to say that, you know, I mean, art is such a broad topic, right? It's infinite, and I feel like whether it's political and reactionary, which to me is the juiciest because it's just jam-packed with so much, but I do believe that, you know, art for beauty exists as well, and I think that everybody's entitled to all of that, but I just feel like I want your reaction on, you know, the common denominator for me would be all of it is about emotion when you parse it. You know, you know, that can be an answer for all of it, you know, wherever it's coming from whatever individual or group.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to generalize, but, you know.
Well, it's not, I don't know. I'm not trying to generalize. I'm just saying what is the common denominator of it, because art exists for everyone at any point in life for any reason, right? It's one of the freest things ever.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it.
Absolutely.
And the politics of it.
Yeah, yeah.
That we get to express.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes. And so I think the book is just a tribute to that, to the artists who have taken their rage, in most cases it's rage, and created amazing things to show other people, to get people to, you know, to feel their rage, but also to say, I see you. Like, I have this rage, and like you might too, and when you see this artwork, we're connecting in this way. There's an I see you aspect that happens a lot in the book, particularly with some of the agitprop posters and other campaigns, but certainly emotion is huge and beauty is huge, and all of the artists, like I've said, they work in their studios too. Aside from what they're doing with the groups and doing activism, the work they make is beautiful. I mean, drop dead gorgeous abstract painting, let's say. So that, I think, maybe what you're getting at is you need that. Because if you're doing this like pretty rough work, which is depressing in many ways and hard and can make the soul feel bad, the poetry that you get from the beauty is like, you know, you take the pill of poetry when you make your abstract painting, and that's you need beauty.
Exactly.
I mean, Nan Goldin
You need
argued,
emotion.
Yeah, you need emotion. There was a quote up here earlier of about beauty that David Wojnarowicz said to Zoe Leonard. I'll just say, so she's talking about, she was making these photographs of clouds, and she worried that they were too apolitical, and David Wojnarowicz said to her, don't give up on beauty. We're fighting so that we can have things like this, so we can have beauty again. Another side of beauty is Nan Goldin, whose work is beautiful, and she cares a lot about beauty. When she was making her protests with pain, her number one, that she told me and her collaborators kept saying to me, the number one thing was, it has to be beautiful. Whatever the protest looks like, it has to be beautiful. The photograph has to be beautiful. Because then the media will pick it up and put it in the newspapers, but it's also beautiful, and it changes people. You know, people want to know if it's beautiful. So beauty's a big part of it. That gets into like questions of aesthetics and kind of goes back to what Ellen and I were talking about before, you know, the academy and how, you know, bigger questions about art history, and I don't think I can unpack all of that, but aesthetics and beauty are huge, and they are part of the book, and I think it's a great question. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
I would like to hear you talk about what I feel like some of the way the questions have framed your book. It has been very narrow, like the term success. Success does, you know, what does that mean in this context?
Yeah.
Project Row House, that is a success. But there's so many other ways that the work that you're talking about has impacted people. So I find that measure very strange in this conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's a good criticism, Carrie. Thank you. Well, that's why I was kind of to say, like, you don't quantify activism through success or failure, and like, there's no like metric to put on this, and that would be ridiculous to do so. Does it make an impact? Like,
You chose things that were successful to you.
right, exactly. Yeah.
How did you do that? You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Oh. Well, a lot of it was if I could speak with the artists and hear that if what they thought about it. So, Carrie, I did speak with you, for example. I'm going to out you that you're in this book. Yeah, like I said earlier to Ellen, like so much of my thinking is I want to talk to the artists and hear what they have to say. If they seemed happy, if they felt like they did something, then I wanted to know more. There were definitely people who I've talked to who were like, I don't want you to write about that, or I don't want to be a part of that, and I don't want to talk about that. There were people who I talked to who were part of some of the collectives early in the book who they disagreed with. They didn't think I should write about it. They thought the group wasn't successful or did not have an impact. So, I mean, success is a funny thing. Like, did museums change completely? No. Aren't they still very conservative institutions? I don't know.
That
like,
we now inadvertently have to defend, right? So they're now these insane, they're still exclusionary tombs, but we have to defend them because now because they're like pillars of liberal democracy, which is being totally dismantled. So it's like, what are we going to do now? But yeah, I think the success thing is interesting because like even in an organization, which I'm sure like it's like there's no agreement about what success is even in a certain organization. But I do think there's a transition now that I think the Mamdani campaign is like part of, which to me harkens back to an older left, which is about like, no, we are going to decide, like who was saying this, Naomi Klein or someone like that, like was just being like, no, we have to actually define winning and we have to win. And I think it was Naomi Klein. But I think that there's a shift from like a really productive ambiguity in terms of the arc of the new left about identifying new ways of being, new ways of living, new kinds of politics, new kinds of ways of loving, ways of existing, which was an extremely important form of doing politics. And I think now there's something where we're all going to have to it's going to get really reductive and we're going to talk about winning.
It is a lot about winning. Yeah, the book is definitely not about winning.
Yeah.
Definitely not. No. And no. And
but I do think there's a shift. I think we wouldn't want to talk about success in the historical arc of this book, but I think now we're at the precipice of something where we have to talk about that.
Well, I mean, because we have to get over what's happening right now. So it's exciting to hear like Joe Rogan or whoever say like the Mamdani campaign this is actually politics for the people. Is that what he said? Like MAGA is not politics for the people. This is politics for the people. This is why they're going to win. This is the winning. And the book is not about winning.
No.
I was compelled by these individual stories. If I saw the light up in the artist's eyes, like we did this thing and it was important and no one knows about it, I would get excited. I wanted to know more. At the same time, there were all these complications going on, like, everybody's an activist now. Who's not an activist? Like, everybody's an activist. So I wanted to say, like, what is that then? If everybody is now claiming this title, as they did after 2020 in particular, well, what did that actually look like before? Like, is there a real distinction here? I didn't want to create criteria. I didn't really want to fall into this trap. But I wanted to show historical facts, like I've said, and examples of like, this is what activism is. Like, this is what happened here. And no, not always successful.
Did you find when you interviewed people from the same group that they had totally different views or stories? Can you give us a...
So, and like I said, like some of them were like, I don't want to talk about this at all. This was horrible.
And don't talk to that other person, or like, go talk to that other person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Don't talk to that other person.
Don't talk to this person, yeah.
Or like, I don't want to hear that name again, ever. Don't ever mention that name again. Yeah. No, I mean, there was a lot of infighting, of course. That's always the case. So, yeah.
How did you navigate that?
Well, because people don't like it that, like, well, this person's name rose to the top, and why didn't mine? That's always the star power thing is a problem. campaigns have to move beyond star power, but at the same time, they don't like win without a star somehow. It's bizarre. But anyway, I was interested in collectives that remained anonymous in some way. I thought that was a tactic that worked, which that's something I enjoy and I think is a strong activist tactic.
Yeah.
I don't know. There was a lot of talk. People couldn't remember things for sure. That's another thing when you start asking questions and they're like, I don't remember. And the archives are very incomplete and there's a box under somebody's bed over here and there's a box over there and like maybe you can put it together. So that it was just detective work for the most part, trying to do that. But in other cases, the artists were very much still around and they wanted to talk, but they also wanted to say like, times were different when we did this and things are a lot more complicated now, So I don't think that what we did then is possible now. Like, it definitely wouldn't happen now. You couldn't do it now. So there was a lot of that. Yeah. I don't know. Carrie, does this answer the question at all? What do you want me to say?
I don't want you to say anything. I feel like using the metric of whether low-income housing was built as some way to measure an art project feels, totally stacked. It's like that's not how we need to talk about it.
But that was their goal. Their goal was to prevent black people from being evicted. So they created housing to prevent black people from being evicted. That was the success.
I agree that it was successful. But what I'm saying is that every group, I was imagining, I haven't read it yet, had some other way of thinking about how they were influencing or why they needed to do this.
Well, they were imagining a different future too. Like they were always imagining something better, that they could. It sucked. Like they were in a position that something sucked, like society, the government, many different things. And they were trying to, as artists, which is the work everyone can do, not even as an artist, imagine a better future and kind of trying to get to that level. So that's some of the work that they did. But, what's also interesting is a lot of these things, I wouldn't call them art projects. It's it was, I don't think I would call Project Row Houses an art project. It's it's a nonprofit now. It's not even social practice art. I never think of it as social practice, really. I thought it was just artists who got together in a group and started rebuilding houses and campaigned for money, became a real nonprofit, got major grants. They were able to create, exhibitions and sell work, maybe? Oh, that's a good question, actually, I don't know. But have residencies, create housing for different groups of people, permanent housing, then preservation housing, all these different things. It's not an art project, it's just artists doing stuff.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Row houses is, I think, I grew up in row houses, some of my very first volunteering experiences of art, all that. My mom's from the neighborhood. And yeah, totally transformative place. But I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, it is a nonprofit and it does a community land trust. It does all these kind of very practical social activities. But it was from conception, modeled after Joseph Beuys' social sculpture. But the criteria of artistic success for a social sculpture is also its measure of social success. Yeah. So it's the degree to which it's able to realize its political vision, its community organizing position, all that type of stuff is also the degree to which it is working as an artwork.
Well, I think Rick Lowe from Project Row Houses went out to Watts and worked. No, he did. No, he.
No, it was
Yeah.
In Watts, in the 60s, that came out of that core of black artists. This is all part of the black art. That doesn't get written about because often that's, they tend to focus on art objects. But I'm just saying that I know he was one of the foundational people for Susan Lacey.
Noah Purifoy, you mean? The assemblage artist Noah Purifoy, yeah. Yeah, the guy who started the...
No, I was something else. He was the founder of Watts Towers.
Yeah. No.
John Outerbridge.
No.
John Outerbridge? No, I'm thinking Watts is the man.
Okay, I don't know.
But I'm just making the link of housing, because this is about people's lives. It's like the Harlem Renaissance. It's Harlem. I mean, it's housing and it's living, and it's like, how do we envision ourselves and how do we transform? And in that process, we're bringing it's interrelated. So I'm just saying, to your point, that these things are not separate.
Yeah.
So we are at time. Thank you, everybody that came out on this very hot night. It's okay to clap. You can clap.